Grief changes everything, including your marriage. So whether it's a loss of a loved one, a miscarriage, a dream that's died, or even a season that ended abruptly, grief can either pull couples apart or draw them closer. In this episode, we're going to unpack how to stay connected when both of you are hurting in different ways.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Imperfectly Married, the podcast.
Where real talk meets real marriage.
We're Michael and Heather.
26 years in and still figuring it out.
No filters, no fluff.
Just real love.
Real life.
And a whole lot of grace.
Amen.
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
We're
back at it.
We're back at it.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about the big G word.
Yeah.
It's grief.
Yeah.
It's a little heavy.
It is heavy. That's reality.
I will give kind of like a pre-warning that it's like if you're walking through grief, I really hope that you would grab something from this episode, but I would also just be open to if it starts getting too heavy for you, or if you're kind of feeling like, ooh, this might be a little much, or even just our shared experiences are maybe just hitting a little bit too close to home, turn it off and save this episode, bookmark it for maybe like later when you're feeling a little bit more emotionally prepared to hear about it, because I think we're going to give some good tips on how to walk through grief when either one person's grieving and the other one's not, or you're both grieving, and how to really walk through that in marriage, because we don't all grieve the same.
No, we don't.
And I would say even every type of grief or every new cycle of grief can actually look different also. I know that grief has shown up very differently in different aspects of my life. And so just a little bit of a warning that this could be a little bit more of a heavy episode, but I do think that grief impacts us all at some point in our marriage. Whether it's an actual physical death or it's, even just a death of a dream or a death of a job, or, it's like we all kind of grieve, these things differently, and they all affect us in a different way. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. And that's where this topic, I think, really touches would touch every person that's listening to this, because oftentimes when you think of grief, you automatically go to death of an individual family member, something like that. Right. And that's absolutely true. But grief is also part of the loss of something that you expected or have always had. That is a loss of a friendship, not necessarily death, but loss of a friendship, loss of a job, like you said, loss of a dream. And this reaction to the pain of loss is what they call grief. And so it can show up in so many ways. And I think we often discount when we're actually in the process of grief, because you often only attach it to like a death or something like that, but it's not. It is actually it's not just sadness. It is something more. It's something that's lasting almost, that needs to be gone through. And oftentimes people don't grieve very well, because you're not, we've talked about this before, the fact that we, for our faith friends, we were created not to have to carry this type of emotion, grief. We were never intended to. When God created Adam and Eve in the garden, it was perfect. Death wasn't a factor. It wasn't a thing. And so our design was never to carry or operate in grief, but it's something that we've had to adapt to try to walk out in a healthy way. And oftentimes, because it's painful, people just avoid it, stuff it, and not deal with it.
Yeah.
I'm classic stuffer, but it is so important because it could be destructive and you don't even know it. You don't know the rot that can happen internally when grief is not walked out.
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of the time there is an underlying grief, like what you were saying, like of a friendship, of a job, of a dream, of these, some would say like smaller issues that you're actually walking through grief, but you don't want to acknowledge it because it actually hurts so bad that you're not willing to acknowledge it for what it is. And you're just kind of trying to move on and stuff it. And that causes that underlining division of there's not that unity because you're not able to share your shared experience with your significant other because you're just trying to stuff it or just trying to move on and move on too quickly, I think is a lot of the time what we do with grief also. So when grief enters into a relationship, what would, like, we've walked through seasons of my mom passing away, your sister passing away, nephews, dad, like we've had a lot of
death.
We've had a lot of death,
like physical death, but also
we've also had like the death of dreams, the death of friendships, and that kind of thing. What would you say that I would say the first huge one was either the death of your dream of being a police officer, but then also the physical death of my mom. So when that entered into our marriage, how do you think that you coped and dealt with things? And then how did you perceive me dealing with it?
So it took me a long time to even realize that I was grieving the loss of the dream of becoming a police officer. I always wanted to. It was something that I was like, this is what I'm doing with my life. I'm going to be a police officer. And then some certain situations happened which didn't allow that. And it took me years to come to the place of realizing, like, oh my goodness, I am not feeling the disappointment of failure. I'm choosing not to walk through the pain of maybe feeling rejected, not being good enough. Even it's interesting because even in that situation, those weren't even valid. This was totally different, but that's what I walked away with. Like I said I wanted to do it, and I'm not doing it. And so there was a level of not feeling like I was ever going to measure up. So that was my way of dealing, was largely stuffing. But over the years, and I would say through faith, that I was able to recognize why was it that I wanted it so bad, but also realizing that, okay, this still is a grief to me. It's a grief to my heart. There's a grief to my kind of the manliness of who I wanted to become.
Right.
So that's kind of how I process mine. Now, yours, on the other hand, your processing of grief, from my perspective, it was a very numb almost. Is just it was such a heavy weight of processing everything that you were very It was seemingly difficult for you to accept the fact that literally my mom's dead, and how can she be dead? She was only, how old was she?
Oh gosh, you're gonna ask me age.
62, maybe.
Yeah,
I think she was 62. So young, and having it happen in such a way that happens in our home. We, had her in our home with us. And so I know the first good chunk of time, and I don't know that we necessarily talked about this at the time, but how I was experiencing watching you walk through it was this level of unbelief. How do you even go forward? This is not supposed to happen. This is not how we're supposed to be doing this. And it took some time to really get on I'm not even going to say the right path, because it's not the right path. Everybody grieves differently. But in the beginning, I really saw a lot of difficulty there. It was almost like a checkout, because it's so painful. It's just so painful, and not wanting to have to deal with that.
Yeah, and I think what happened was I had this idea that, and I don't even know where I came up with it. I had created my own timeline of grief, and I said, if I can get through the first year after she passed away, then I would be okay. And so I tried to hold it together as much as I could for that year. And I just remember at the 1 year anniversary, I became stuck because I was just trying to hold it all together because the kids were really little, and I had witnessed something that was so jarring, and it felt so almost like violating in a way that it was like, because this isn't supposed to happen. It was so unnatural, and it was something that was expected. You know, she had breast cancer, and so it's like we had hoped that she would pull through and be in remission, and that wasn't our story. But I felt like it's like I was trying to help my mom. I was trying to help just everyone like cope, and it's like I was the strong one through everything. That's what almost like it hurt me more in the long run because I didn't allow myself to actually feel my own pain. I was too busy trying to help everyone else in theirs. And that was just a real big challenge for me. I remember.
But in the midst of it, it seemed like the best way to process, because it was allowing you not to necessarily have to feel it. You could walk somebody else through it.
Yeah. I didn't want to feel any of it because my feelings were so opposite of what I thought that they were going to be. I thought I would grieve the loss of my mom and be easily be able to move on. And because we didn't have a relationship that I so wanted. I wanted the relationship that I have with my daughter now. I wanted that with my mom, and I always wanted that with my mom, but we just were never able to achieve that. And so when she died, it was one of those things that I had to grieve the relationship that I thought we were going to have, not necessarily the relationship that we did have. So it's like I was almost doing like this double grief, but it wasn't until a year later that I even allowed myself to feel into that. And so I was just always like in this like tension of holding it all together, homeschool the kids, be super mom, be all these things to everyone else. We were doing youth ministry at the time. So it's like we just had like all of these things that we still had to keep moving forward, that it didn't allow me that time to grieve. And I think that once grief enters a marriage or in a relationship or a human's life, I don't necessarily believe that grief ever leaves after it's come in, because
it's now just part of your
changes.
Yeah.
It's like I still get triggered.
Yeah.
If I see someone that looks like my mom, it's like my heart yearns. Like I'm just like, oh, I'm like, I just want to hear her voice. And it's like, and it's been 13 years, 12 years. It's been a long time, and it's just changed, but it's still there. And I think that in a spousal relationship, when we think that it's like the other person is going through grief, us asserting our own timeline onto our spouse can be very dangerous.
It is.
Because
that
once grief enters marriage, and this is just my personal belief, I don't have any stats or anything, but I just don't think that grief ever leaves. I think it just changes, and it can heal and it can morph, but it's never gone.
Interesting, because it's interesting that you say it like that, because grief, when you think about it, grief is love trying to find a place to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would never not have that. You would never not have that love for your mom. Now, it is a very important point to bring up again with what you said, is that you, in grieving the loss of your mother, were also grieving something that you never had, which was a relationship that you always wanted. And now, not having her in human form here, you're now also grieving that.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes I think that people could have this feeling of grief, and the thing that happened is only a portion of the grief that they're actually grieving, but they're grieving something that they're not, that they thought that this either opportunity was going to turn into, or, and maybe people from the outside would look in and go, it was just a job. It's no big deal.
Right.
You'll get another job.
Right.
But yet they're grieving, this was a job that I thought was going to launch me into this other thing. And people could, make the mistake of going, no, it's, don't, just get over it. Just kind of move
Right.
on. Because there is no timeline for grief. And anybody that would put a timeline on it is just uncomfortable that somebody else is grieving, and they
Right.
don't know what to do with themselves.
Right.
There literally is no timeline. I remember last week when we were working and you pulled up a bank statement and there's your mom's name, and it's something that you see every month, and it's still something that you see and read, and it's a reminder that, your mother passed away.
Right.
I think it's interesting, in our own experience, we've had a lot of death around us.
Yeah.
And you kind of listed them, but it started with your mother. It went to my dad, or my stepfather. Then it went to nephews, or my sister, and then nephews. Your mom was farther out, but there was several in 5 years. Just in 5 years, there were several. And us having to work out together how to grieve that, because our first experience was grieving your mother. And I was I'd never experienced taking care of someone who was grieving, but also grieving in my own way, grief of my mother-in-law being lost.
Yeah.
But also trying to be the right fit for you as you're going through grief. I think I did that well sometimes. I think other times I didn't do it well. I know what I would say. I would say that in the times that I didn't do it well, it's because I didn't know what to do. So I defaulted to anger, frustration, and that's all because I didn't know what to do. I don't know how. And I think that's something as the partner, spouse of someone who is grieving, you have to understand it's us grieving, not them. You're grieving together.
Right.
And it's a process that when you decide to trust each other, when you decide to allow your relationship to be a safe space for the primary griever, it can create a bond in that relationship that you can't get other ways. It's a trauma bond, right? It's a trauma bond that you go through, and there's an opportunity there to really show care and bring comfort to your spouse in the midst of grief. But you have to choose to be in it. You can't abandon it. You can't. And this is what I would be. I would tend to not want to dive into it because of the not necessarily knowing how to care for you in the right way, because we'd never done it before, right? The way you grieve is completely different than how I grieve. And I know what I am still learning, but I feel like I've got a handle on is really being okay with every stage of grief. And, there are the stages out there that they say, and, those are important to know, but grief comes in waves. It doesn't come in like, oh, you've been 3.5 weeks. Oh, the next stage is coming. It literally comes in waves, and it could hit either of you differently at different times, where you could be angry and then I could be sad, and then I could be angry and then you could be, wanting to think about and reminisce and talk about and all of that kind of stuff. It's just, there is no perfect way to grieve. But I would say one of the most important points of grieving, and I learned this, I was told this from my sister, who has had an immeasurable amount of grief to have to walk through. Giving yourself permission to feel it all. Feel it all. There is no wrong feeling. Feel everything. Lean into everything. Allow yourself to feel all the feels, no matter what comes up, and giving yourself permission for that. Sometimes the people that try to help will, with the right heart, be like, you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't say those things, or you shouldn't think those things. They try to make it better when it's like, maybe I just need silence.
And sometimes too, it's like grief manifests itself in so many different ways. It could just be that it's like all of a sudden it's like they're on edge about something that happened at work, and it's like that's really not what's putting them on edge. There's a level of grief. And so I have a couple like signs of grief. So like the emotional signs of grief can be like the sadness, tears, anger, like guilt, like a numbness or like shutting down, and then anxiety or fear.
Yep.
But then we also have like the physical signs of grief that I think we forget about too, which is like the fatigue. It's the exhaustion, it's the brain fog, headaches or body aches, loss of appetite, or the opposite of overeating. And then we have like the restlessness and insomnia. Like I dealt with insomnia a lot when my mom was passing away. And then it's like, you're going to tend to get sick more often because your immunities are just down. Like I remember there were times where it's like, I would be going to the grocery store and I'd have to call you because I had to pull over, and I'm just like,
what
I'm
am I
like, babe,
doing?
I'm like, I know that I am going to the store, but I don't even know where I normally shop.
Oh, I remember that.
And you're like, what? And I'm like, I need to get milk, bread, and like eggs or something like that. And I was like, where do I normally go? Because I'm like, I can go to Trader Joe's, I can go to Sprouts, I can go to Vons, I can go to Costco. I'm like, which one do I go to for those things? And it was one of those things that it's like my brain could not even compute where I was going. But it's like, I also needed to get out of the house to start feeling normal also. Then we also have like relational signs of grief. So this could be like pulling away, or the opposite of where it's like you start getting super clingy. There's a lot of miscommunication. I know that for us, I felt like we had a lot of miscommunications within the first like year of grief. I remember it in one situation. It's like, I remember sitting there and we were talking, like you were like, oh yeah, I have had a headache for like a week. And I was like, what? And I just like freaked out, and I'm like, you need to go to the doctors right away. Like you need to go get that checked because your real dad had died of brain cancer. And so now every single small symptom, I'm just like, everyone's going to die. And so it was just, we were having a miscommunication because my feelings and emotions were like on the inside out. And then emotional reactivity, like small, like disagreements feel very explosive. Some spiritual signs of grief. I've dealt with this a lot, especially when we're talking about like dreams and hopes and desires. When you're kind of grieving those things, all of a sudden you feel distant from God. You start saying like, why did he let this happen? Searching for meaning. What am I supposed to learn? Clinging tighter to your faith. So finding comfort in prayer and worship can also be there. But then wrestling with hope, learning to trust again after like nothing's making sense. And then lastly, we have behavioral signs of grief, which is withdrawal from social activities.
Yeah.
We have avoidance of anything that reminds you of loss. That's me. Like when your entire family was dealing with a lot of this loss, your dad, your sister, and 2 nephews, it was really hard for me to show up and be present because loss hits me so like tender now. And it's hard for me to be there and be supportive to friends that are walking through a loss, because it's hard for me to enter back into those emotions, because I feel as though it's like if I go into those emotions, I'm never going to get out of it. And so for me, it feels like I'm sinking in grief. So it's really hard for me to show up for people in their grief. So I usually show up in ways that allow me to put the borders on. And you've really helped me with this too, that it's like sometimes you're just like, babe, like you got to show up, you got to push through, you got to be there. But then there's also times of where you're like, yeah, sit on the sidelines. It's okay. And you've really helped me to be like, okay, like this is an important one that I need to show up for, versus the ones that it's like, okay, you can take a back seat on this one. I got this one. Like there's been times where you've shown up to the hospital with a friend.
Totally. And that's one of those points in marriage and in a relationship where that is where you show up for each other in the midst of grief, is giving permission for helping. Maybe your spouse is just so behind the veil of safety that they can't see, hey, this may be a good step, or you're right, this is let's just sit this one out. But without that engagement, without that engagement of walking together through the grief and walking your spouse through it, grief is not a bad thing in itself, because you're processing a measure of loss. But grief is one of the things that, if not processed right, no, I want to take that back. If not processed, that's what I'll say. If not processed, can show up later in your relationships. Like just you were saying, you're all of a sudden you're angry at work for some reason, but it's actually not the work thing. Right. It's the loss of 3 years ago that whatever that loss was, because it was unprocessed. And I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of the podcast, because you had mentioned that grief is not something you process and are done with and you just put up on the shelf and you're done. Grief is now scattered throughout the new normal, because it's not the point of processing grief is not to go back. It's not to go back to where you were, because you can't. You can't do that. It's actually impossible. You can't do that
because you're different now.
Everything is different now, and so processing grief is the process of walking through loss, walking through this unplaced love now because there's loss, and then in some measure redefining who I am now based on this new part in me that is now grieving and getting to that place. But I'm so big, and I got this a lot from you. I'm so big on encouraging people to be. It's okay. It's okay to take a long time. It's okay to be bearing the weight. It's okay to not. Everything is okay. There is no right way, as long as you are walking through it. The wrong way is not to, right? I would say that, and I could be wrong. I'm no psychologist or doctor or anything, but not processing grief can become problematic because you don't know what's eating you up. Right. I mean, I know. I mean, when we closed our church journey, I don't know that I've ever grieved that. I know I've looked back on the decisions of it and what I feel now was right or wrong or indifferent or stuff like that. But that was a dream. We were in the process of the dream, and then
I think I've grieved it enough for the both of us.
Probably so. But what I'm saying is that's not healthy for me. I know I have, and not wanting to walk that out again or feel that is exactly what we're saying we shouldn't be doing, because you need to feel that. And in fact, when you feel it, I think when you begin to lean into the feeling of the grief, other aspects of your grief open up, which allow you the maybe the strength and the gumption to keep going, as opposed to not going anywhere and just, I'm grieving.
Right. And I think that too, when every once in a while, when it does like rear its ugly head, like in the beginning, it's there. It's a constant companion. And then it's like slowly, it's like it starts feeling like you have more normal moments in the midst of grief. But then it's like you're going to have those pockets. And I think that as those pockets, come up, saying, okay, I'm going to allow myself to really feel this for 3 hours or for the next 2 days, or putting a timeline on it that it's like where it's almost like you're in control of the process. Because I think that for me, that was one of the things that it's like, I learned that it's like, okay, I'm going to feel into this for a certain time. Cause I didn't have enough time in my life, and I didn't have enough white space to really grieve for a long time. So I could feel into it for an hour. I could feel into it for a day. I could feel into it for a certain pocket of time. But then it's like, I would allow myself that time to really get into it and then move on. And my moving on could have been, okay, I'm going to intentionally stuff in this moment so that I can now resume life, and we're going to revisit this. And so it wasn't like stuffing and stuffing and stuffing. It was, okay, I need to put this aside so that I can, do X, Y, and Z, or further the kids, or, it's like, you can't just allow yourself to sit in grief indefinitely. And if you are feeling that depth of like, I don't know that I can even say I can't grieve past this point, then I think that it's probably good to like get into some good healthy therapy of where it's like you're able to process those things in that safe place. Because there is a time, there is a season, like the scripture says that it's like there's a time and a season for everything under the sun. And so it's like there is a time to grieve, and there is a time to mourn, and there is a time to really lean and feel into those things. Like I love like reading about like the whole like historical part of grief. It's like it was a community experience back in biblical times.
And it went for a while.
Yes.
For days.
And it was like, like the tearing of the clothes, and it's like, you wouldn't bathe. And it was like, but then it was like, what would happen is the community would come around you and they would help you to bathe, to get your clothes back. And like to where it was like this beautiful process of where everyone kind of came around you. And I think that that's also where community within a church community is great, to be able to have that grief like pocket around you. But then also with your spouse, like invite your spouse into the process with you. There's nothing to be shameful for.
Absolutely not.
There's it shouldn't take too long or too quick. Like there is no right timeline on it. And I think that that's where we get kind of mixed up, and we start putting our own expectations on grief. And that's where it can get dangerous.
Because healing and getting through grief it's not about getting over it. It's about learning to live with it differently. And so having a goal of just, I guess, want to be done. You're not going to be done.
You're never going to be done.
Yeah, you're not going to be done. And that's okay. And I mean, if there's any one of our listeners, if you're grieving right now, encourage you to connect with people connect with people. I love that because the biblical record of how mourning went, that there's something to that. Being with people, being cared for, talking these things out, getting into your community, because having someone walk that out with you. Now, for us, it's our marriage, right? And even in the midst of your marriage, if both of you are grieving and it's just, you feel stuck, go get another couple, talk to your pastor, go to a therapist, something like that. But continuing the process, the only thing that you can do that's bad for yourself in grief is stopping the process.
Yeah.
There are
and
times,
isolating.
Yeah, and isolating, absolutely. There are times that you're silent and you're being contemplative. That's your processing. That's something I do. But it's important for the other spouse not to take that silence as disconnection. It's just it's again another process of grieving. And my sister said to me when I asked her about we're going to do this episode on grief, and was getting some insight from her. And one of the things that she said, the very first thing she said was capital letters and exclamation points: grace, grace, grace. It's having grace, because the process of grief has no blueprint, has zero blueprint. You don't know. Yes, some psychologists came up with the stages of grief. Yes, sure, that is true, and you could probably find, but you could go from 1 to 4 to 2, back to 5, back to 1. So there is no process other than going through the process,
Right.
and I think that's so important.
Yeah. And being okay with your spouse going through that process and jumping back and forth. It's like a pinball machine. It's like,
oh yeah,
it is all over the place. And I will say that it's like, there were times within my grief that I was like, I feel like I'm going crazy. And that was just the reality of what I was walking through and what I was processing when I've like dealt with like, the loss of a dream or the loss of a job or a career. It's like, those are all like stages of grief for me. And
valid,
it's, and I've had to like walk through a lot of unmet expectations, which we have an episode on that if you're dealing with unmet expectations, go listen to that. But there's so many places where grief can creep in. And I think that the biggest thing that we want to do in our grief is we want to isolate, because we feel as though it's like, well, no one's really going to understand, or, oh, I'm being a lot right now, or wow, so like people can't carry my pain and my emotions. I've dealt with a lot of the times, because I'm such a verbal processor, like, oh, I'm a lot for my friends. And it's like, so what it does is it actually keeps me from sharing with my friends, because I don't want to let them in, because for one, I'm afraid that they're not going to like meet me where I need them to be, or they're just going to try to fix me out of it. Or I feel as though it's like, I'm just being too much. That point I want to go back to, that is so important. If you are a friend or a spouse of someone that's grieving, don't try to fast forward the process. Saying these, it's all uncomfort. It's just what we're just trying to make you feel better. Like, at least they're in a better place, or they're. That one always got me.
The grass is greener on the other side. All of these things. Yes, it's coming from the right heart, but what you don't understand is it seems disingenuous, because it's just not helpful. It's just not helpful. Being there and not rushing somebody through it. I remember in youth ministry, we still say this today. If someone's in the midst of something, we never say we're going to pray you out of it. It's a process that you need to walk through. So we're going to pray you through it, because there could be something beautiful on the other end. All of a sudden now you start to have gratitude. Gratitude doesn't necessarily make it go away, but it does kind of balance the scales a little bit of grief, especially when you have gratitude over either the person or situation or the context of what you're grieving. I think that really helps. And then, you do come to a place to where you might be able to find joy, and wisdom. You know, one of the things that took you a while to come to the realization that you were grieving a relationship you never had.
Right.
Like you're grieving an intangible. You're grieving something that you created in yourself and a desire, and now you know it's never going to happen. Though it is as real as the physical loss, people need to understand that that is a reality. Like if you were expecting a promotion at work and you don't get it, that's grief. That's not just disappointment. You're now grieving what you thought was going to happen, and now that's a loss. And being okay with walking through the process of that and not just attaching the word grief and the process of grief and the reality of grief to a physical loss or death, but a loss of anything, anywhere, at any time. Because grief can hit you hard in a moment's notice.
Yeah, and moving together in it. You know, I think one of the things that was really interesting about my revelation with my relationship with my mom was it wasn't until you and I were sitting there and I was actually like sharing with you like what I was dealing with. And this was like probably a year and a half after my mom had passed away. I was telling you about like what I was struggling with at that point. And you looked at me because I was sharing like, oh, well, like our relationship was like this. And you looked at me and you were like, babe, that wasn't the relationship that you had with your mom. And I was like, wait, what? And you were like, that's not what you experienced. And it was only because I was sharing with you my thoughts and my feelings did you actually bring in truth that helped me. And it was in that moment that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm creating this new narrative of what I believed that our relationship was or how I wanted it to be. And that's actually why I was feeling stuck was because I had created this fantasy that, oh, it was like this when it was never like that. And only because we were communicating and you were having grace for me in that communication, but also being willing and bold enough to share that it's like that's not truth. And the way that you're seeing that isn't accurate in this moment.
A year and a half after.
A year and a half after.
Important.
Yeah.
3 days in, not helpful.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. If you would have done that 3 days
that's what I'm
in,
saying. But that's important to realize that you're still processing at that time. And when you're in it together and you're just go along the process, it will come up when it comes up. That's when that moment happened, and it happened at the right time. The soil of your heart was prepared to receive it, and there was safety in communicating that for both sides. That was a huge turn.
And that's why I think it's so important. Like what your sister was saying is grace and grace and grace. And you're just going to keep on extending grace to yourself and to your spouse and to anyone that's walking over any sort of disappointment.
Now, one thing too for our faith friends out there that have faith, that is one of the most important relationships and dynamics of walking through faith in a healthy way, because you have access to a power that will comfort you, bring comfort to you, bring peace to you, and that doesn't make any sense. The Bible talks about that. And you have access to God that wants to comfort you in the midst. I mean, his scripture says he is near the brokenhearted. That's what scripture says. So you, me, we, being in the midst of grief, we can know that our Father's there and he's waiting to comfort you. He's waiting to give you strength. And my sister said again, sometimes I prayed for strength for the day, for the hour, for the next minute, because it was constantly there. And my sister is she could probably write a book about her processing grief, but, and I think you should, Chris. But the biggest thing that I've learned in watching her is allow all the feels to feel. And she committed to feeling them, and she committed to processing it right, and just keep processing. Don't force anything. Don't rush anything. And it was such a beautiful picture to me of processing grief. Now, that doesn't make it a standard. You just from the outside look and go, wow, that person appeared to have processed grief well. Every single person will process grief differently, which I'm really excited about our next episode, talking about the Enneagram and how different types will process grief. I would recommend everybody, it doesn't matter if you're in the Enneagram or not, I'd recommend you listen to that episode, because you will find yourself and your spouse in that episode and be able to understand how each of you processes grief, because that is an invaluable piece of information to know about your spouse on how they will process grief and how you process grief, and then how you would do it together is so important, because grief is one of those things that can fracture a marriage, that can drive you apart, depending on the context of the grief, can really be a destructive thing in your relationship. But it can also be one thing that you grab hands and you say, we're doing this together, and you can get through it. You will absolutely get through it. But if you commit to choosing each other in that moment.
Yeah. And I also want to say that it's like, we've never experienced the grief or the loss of a child
Ever.
And to where it's like that, I do believe is a little bit of a different ball game, because both the spouses are walking through the same level, but different of grief. And to where it's like, if that's where you find yourself, first off, like, grab a hold of a faith community. I know that can cause a lot of like questions with God, and
because a lot of people don't know how to deal with someone in grief. So that could be scary for people,
Oh, 100%. But I'm talking about mainly spouses that it's like are walking through that together. Like, go get in therapy, grab a hold of like a really strong community, and it's okay, whatever stage you're at. But I would say that it's like, I don't know that we can necessarily speak from like that place, but we do, like, I know your sister would love to like reach out to anyone that is walking through those things. Absolutely. And so it's like, if you are sitting here listening to this and you've lost a child, or like both spouses are kind of walking through grief at the same time, like, reach out to us, because it's like, I know that we can definitely give you resources that would help you be able to walk that out. Yep. Well, I just kind of felt like I wanted just to wrap it up with grief doesn't mean that your story is over. It means that you're both being rewritten. And the most beautiful love stories are the ones that survive the storm together.
Absolutely.
And I know that that's been true for us.
Absolutely has been.
I think grief and like those really difficult times really did kind of bring us together, because you tend to sweep things under the rug, but then I tend to cling. And so in our situation, it worked for us, and we're just here to
allowed us to actually lean on each other.
Yeah.
Having to depend on the strength of the other one to get you through.
Because I couldn't.
And when you do that together, it creates a bond that you can't get in other ways.
Yeah. And it's not always the same for everyone, but there is hope that it can be rewritten that way.
Hope can balance the scale.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So cool. I love you.
I love you.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for spending time with us today on Imperfectly Married.
We hope something in today's episode encouraged you or gave you a fresh perspective.
If it did, share it with a friend, leave a review, or connect with us on our social platforms.
Remember, no marriage is perfect.
But yours is worth fighting for.
See you next time.